Dr. Carolyn Walter, who is an expert in the field of grief and loss and bereavement, social work. You were at Whitmore and Widener throughout your career. Has written books on the subject of grief and loss. I'll let her talk a little bit more about her work in the field. We're going to turn it over to her, so please give a nice welcome to Dr. Carolyn Walter.
Well, first I wanted to thank both David and Dawn for giving me this opportunity to share some of my expertise, wisdom, whatever it is, and also such an excellent introduction to the workshop that David did about past, present, and future losses. He mentioned a lot of the things that we're going to look at, because how you've coped with the losses, how you've coped with losses before has something to do with what you're going to see that you were able to cope, and that'll transfer over to how you're dealing with now and the future, thinking about losses. We're also going to explore losses and issues that are common to the older adult. Is that loud enough? Okay. Just give me the high sign if you can't hear, okay? And you have a sheet on that I'll go over with you later. And then we're going to talk about how you heal and eventually grow from these losses by preserving and treasuring the bond that you had with the lost person, or it could be a home, it could be health, it could be many things. And then we're going to talk about self-forgiveness and how that contributes as we go forward. And finally, meaning making and understanding the loss and how that contributes to your moving forward. So a lot of the grief literature now has explored some of these things that really help people heal, that they've looked at and had people give the responses, and they go and look at it and see, well, what is the most important thing here? Turns out there are a few things that have come up in the, let's see, in the late 1990s. Grief literature really took a big turn, and I'll share with you later why that was true. And for me, it was when I went to this conference and heard these people talk about what they called continuing bonds. It was sort of an eye-opener to me, because I think prior to that I had been someone who thought, and I was trained this way, you need to separate, you need to cut it in order to heal. And the new literature was pushing people more in the other direction. So I had just, well, it was several years ago, lost my husband prior to going to the conference, and I was young. And what they said to me really made sense. I mean, this is how people get started with an idea. I'm sure you know that, but I thought, wow, you know, I'm in my life, but I'm still feeling so attached to John, my first husband. There's something wrong with me, but not really. You know, they were laying it out, and we'll get into this more specifically. I just wanted to tell you about me.
Excuse me, madam, could you speak louder and more
slowly? Will do. Sorry about that. Okay. Have to practice loud. I'm not.
Well, not a little louder.
I can't.
Well, you have to do it for us.
Well,
I can't hear you about it.
I know. I don't want that to happen. Okay. So anyway, we're going to cope with some of those things too. But the end result of all that was, when I went to that conference, I was teaching at Widener, and I was looking for opportunities to sort of work through my own stuff. And lo and behold, from that experience at that conference, a publisher from Columbia came to campus, and one of my friends said, you need to talk to him. There's a book in you. So this was in 2003, this book came out. So it's dated, but I've had people say, still talk about those people in that book because they were so helpful to me. So 2003 was when I wrote it, and things have changed, fortunately, for the gay lesbian population, hopefully for partners in general who have, you know, not had so much of a voice. So leaving that aside, and since then I've published more books, but we don't need to hear about that. This is the book I think will mean the most for me today. And I just wanted to quote to you, and I don't know the source, but I love this quote about grief. Grief is initially uninvited and unwanted house guest. It's a house guest that arrives within the context of an experience of loss. It sweeps into all our domains of life and relationships. You really have to make room for grief, and you have to allow yourselves that time And that's so often what we do. We jump into being busy and we forget that we really do need to stay there. So you need to make room for grief so that it doesn't take over. And my belief is that losses and growth, really, if they're worked on and you allow yourself some time, you will heal from them. It's amazing what happens. I never thought I would ever be doing some of the things I'm doing prior to the loss of my spouse. So I think that's really important in all this. Okay, and I just want to say up front that loss is unique to each person, and everyone grieves in a different way. And we have to really honor that, and we have to respect ourselves. So no matter what we're feeling, it's okay. And as Don would say, self-compassion. You know, it may be a struggle, but let's stay with it and see where it goes. It's easy to say, and I'm here to, but as we know, it's not easy to do. And we'll talk a little bit more about that lately. So, what I first wanted to do was just get some ideas from you, and I think Julie was going to help with this, because I can't write and talk at the same time, plus my handwriting is awful. So when I put this up there, I thought, oh dear, that's a good thing I have somebody writing for me. So thank you very much, Julie. So I want to get on board just your reactions to loss in terms of what psychologically you remember, when it was physical and emotional. How did loss affect your life? And I just wanted to have people chime in wherever they feel, and Julie will put it down. So, yes?
Emotional pain.
Great, right there. One of the hardest to stay with, right? The emotional pain is very hard to stay with for most people. It's what we try to get rid of, get away from.
Subsurface scores.
I'm sorry?
Subsurface scores.
Self-service.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Subsurface.
My hearing is,
Surface.
okay.
Subsurface scores.
Surface scars.
Subsurface scores.
Subsurface scars. Scarring.
Oh, scarring, oh, yeah. So where does that go? Psychological?
Oh, psychological.
Okay. You can own where it goes, okay. How about some others? Yes.
I remember when I took care of my aunt who died at 98 for the last 10 years. There was a hole in my life. I felt like there was a hole in my life. And I actually cried. I didn't think I could do that. But you know what? I got over it. This was 10 years ago. Cry. Let yourself grieve.
Beautiful. That's one of the most important things to say
I
today.
never thought I could do it.
And you did it.
I didn't try to do it.
It just happened.
came.
And hasn't that opened up for you other ways to deal with it? You saw yourself cry, you'd never cried like that. So you might be able to say to yourself the next time, it's okay that I have to cry that much. Because a lot
And it wasn't just because she left me the money.
Oh. I'm sure. That's great. That's great. Thank you. Thank you. Okay. So what else? Oh, yes.
Regrets.
Regrets. Big time. Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm. And that's where we need self-compassion.
Psychological or emotional?
And they might go in two. I just put these up here. They can float anywhere you want. Yeah, you can choose, but they might not fit just so.
Looking back on the good times,
Remember the good times. That's a good one. And that really helps you heal when you can start to remember those good times and you don't just think about what they look like when they were sick, dying, whatever the circumstance might be. Any others that we want to put up there?
When you still see the person that passed away?
When you still see the person that passed away. Thank you. That is really important because people think that that's crazy. But John Bowlby has done so much research about this, and he interviewed widows about a year after they suffered their loss. And what he found was the women who had talked to their spouses were doing better. And I mean, that's kind of surprising, isn't it? Because people think, talking to them, oh my gosh. But it's part of keeping in touch with that person that you lost, is being able to talk with them. And maybe you want to ask them a question, you know, and maybe you'll remember how they might answer or how you would want them to answer. So it opens up a lot. Okay.
The reason why I say that is because my cousin passed away also, and she came to me and told me what happened to her. And after she told me what happened to her, I didn't see her no more. I guess she went to rest. But my sister, it'll be 3 years this year in October, that she has passed away, but I can't let her go. Only because we were raised together, we did everything together, and I can't let her go.
That's okay. And you'll see why when we talk a little bit more. But, and cousin loss, I just added that to our textbook for the second edition, and nobody has done any research on it. I mean, I tried to find things, and I finally found someone who had lost a cousin who could share a story, but it's becoming more and more important. And why is that true, do you think? To have a cousin that you might...
I don't know. We were close, very, very, very close, you know. And I think when she died, it took a toll on me because we also did everything together.
Right.
Her mom was my mother's sister. And the fact, the way that she died, I couldn't understand it because she was married and she came back and she told me that it was her husband that killed her.
Wow.
He
Oh, no wonder you...
gave her more of her medicine that she was supposed to take in. And we had just had a birthday party for her. And the next Monday, they told me she had passed away.
And you know, a lot of people hold on for those parties, for those marker anniversaries, and then they feel that they can pass along.
But she actually told me. So.
Don?
I was thinking of physical, just inactivity.
In not being able to be active? kind of? Yeah. And yet that's one of the things that helps, but if you don't feel like it, you know.
And also kind of a lack of energy.
Oh, absolutely. Lack of energy, big time. So you know when you're feeling all that, it's okay. I think someone in the back? Yes.
A sense of recurring grief or loss. I've experienced grief losing parents, grandparents, other relatives. But when I was sick and supposed to die, when I came to a point where they could tell me why my sister wasn't coming to visit me, after 6 months they told me that my sister died 3 months ago.
Oh, wow.
It didn't affect me at that time.
Right, but later.
Hearing you and thinking about the grief, every now and then I think about that sister and I cry because I don't know how I would reacted had I been there, going to the funeral and her having a heart attack, et cetera, et cetera. And occasionally I do have those feelings when I think about that sister and
Right.
I mourn the fact that I was not there. So that's that kind of grief that I'm going through with her.
Right.
With the parents, grandparents,
Right.
pretending that nothing is bothering me, keeping busy, and breaking down when I was in the mirror to brush my teeth and realize that my dad's never going to brush his teeth again.
Right, and that...
That grief I've gone through, but this is just kind of strange, not doing what I would have done, how to behave, would have gone to the funeral, would have cried, would have
Right.
passed out, all those things, just brings
So-
tears to my eye.
Can you
Think about that.
think about what that is up here? Do you have a thought about what, or so many things, really, for you? Emotions, yeah. Yeah.
I'm just traumatized. Now, don't often think about it, but just think about that grief and loss.
Right,
I didn't have a sense of loss at that time when they told me,
right.
oh, I was just a little shocked. Oh, maybe that's what it was, just going through the shock and realize that's why she's not here. Why didn't they
Right.
tell me?
I know, you've said so many important things, and we're going to cover those, so I'm going to ask for somebody else at this point.
So when I think of physical, I think of loss of sleep, loss of appetite.
Oh boy, he's going through it there. Sleep, appetite. Yeah, a lot of those things, huh? They get affected by going through loss. I mean, loss affects everything on every level, really. Okay, are there any others that you want to put up there? Sorry?
Depression
Oh yeah,
and isolation.
isolation, big one. that we sometimes forget that's what happens. We do it we isolate ourselves sometimes just to be able to cope with it. But then we've lost somebody that means something to us. Okay, how about any more emotional? Yeah.
Just from the table here, heavy loss maybe 10 years ago that just changed a person forever. Just 10 years ago, serious loss that just changed their life forever, and even periods of crying that just come up over an extended period of time. So that would be emotional, but
Right.
it ends up being physical.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, they all sort of intertwine, don't they? Okay, one more maybe, and then we'll move on. Okay? All right. The one thing isn't up there is self-esteem, because so often when we lose someone, how can I put it, we're assaulted, our sense of who we are. And I know I went through this. You have to really do things to sort of help yourself feel better, but it isn't easy to do that. So, it's important to remember that that can be one of the reactions to loss. Did we put up anxiety anywhere? No. That's really an important one. People normally experience a lot of anxiety because you're having to give up an attachment, whether it's a person, whether it's a home, no matter what it is, you are having to, detach somewhat. So anxiety comes with that. That's what comes afterward. Yes.
Yeah, would count if like somebody was having flashbacks and like good moments or bad moments where you took them somewhere or they went somewhere and they start having flashbacks?
Absolutely. Where we want to put flashbacks? Flashbacks often come after a trauma or a loss.
Right.
You're trying to sort of work it through. And sometimes people have too many and then they can't cope. But I would say it happens, it's part of loss and trauma to have you go back into that again and try to rework it, sort of. And, yeah, very common. Oh, you haven't spoken yet.
Yes. Mine was resentment, and it's not the person that passed, but other members that did not help to see that person before they passed. My granddad died, and it was like my world ending. My mother could have zipped through Philly and brought me to see him when he was dying in the hospital, but she chose not to. And I love my daughter, don't get me wrong. My granddad and she have different faith, so to speak. But my mom brought my daughter, but she didn't bring me. So I'm like, they don't even get along, so it was so pointless. I was the one he was closest to as far as his grandchildren and I'm just like, really. So I really resent her, and it's just like, it's not fair because there's no way to express that unless you go through therapy or something else, and even then it still doesn't resolve.
Okay, so resentment, big time. And with that, anger. Anger at the person who died, or anger at the loss.
Really with my granddad.
Right.
But my mom.
Yeah, but I think the feelings sometimes are underneath and they don't come out right away. It takes time to face that you might have been angry and love that person too. Do you know what I mean? It's all of a piece because nobody's perfect, right?
That's true. Like, you're kind of
Okay.
angry that you didn't
I'm going to have
longer.
to. Oh, I'm going to move to. Yeah.
I noticed in all your answers, everybody's experiencing the 5 stages of grief.
And that's kind of left people's minds now. Carolyn Ross was very famous, and she helped us a whole lot. But the way she talked about it was, what was it? First you can't do it, shock, and then anger and all that. And what they found in the last 20 years, when they've interviewed, people really don't do it in that order. And I don't have one of the things that I sometimes use, but it's more of a zigzag approach. You sort of go in and out, you go back and forth to anger and bargaining until there's some point at which you begin to accept, but it doesn't go like that. And that was true for many years. I was trained that way and began to open up when I saw this new literature that clearly said it's not that way. And I'm not even sure she meant it to be that way. People write things, but then other people interpret them. So thanks for bringing that up, because I think that's something a lot of people have learned in school, that these are the ways you go through it.
When I heard about that when my mother passed, I tend to go right to acceptance first, and then I process the other ones as I go along.
Right.
What's accepting is closure, but closure is not the end,
Right.
because you have to dissect it as you mature through it.
You know, you've all brought up so many important things, and closure, according to me and a lot of people that are doing research, really doesn't exist. We don't really have final closure. It's something that we carry with us in some ways, and we learn to handle it, but we never really close off to it. I think we're going to have to move a little forward, and I bet I'll be able to answer your question in another part of the talk, because many of the things you've covered, we could spend a whole day on. Okay, I'm just trying to think if there's any other feelings, because they're the ones people would like to ignore.
Maybe relief.
What's that?
Maybe relief.
Very good. One that people don't talk about. So, what would you put? Emotional?
Because they're not going to suffer anymore.
Yeah.
Right.
And then they don't have to pay any taxes, so they're a little bit envious.
And what does that bring with it when you feel relief? What's
The fact that they're not going to struggle and you're not going to really have to watch them suffer.
But some people feel guilty about feeling relieved because
Yeah.
why am I feeling that? You know, I shouldn't feel that with this person. So I'm glad you brought that up.
And stress is not up there either.
Yeah.
Okay.
My granddad and I were real close, and I'm like, now who in the family will talk to me like a person instead of being the family, and that pisses me off.
Right. So, you know, I guess
Yeah, that's a good one, Melvin.
we've probably done enough of this, but I think it brought out so many issues, and you all are very good
Thank you.
at bringing them out because I don't have to do as much work, which is good.
We're done.
I can only wish. No, I don't want to be done yet. Okay, and as David mentioned in the literature, I just want to get this out. You know, loss is not just death.
Yeah.
Loss involves many other things. So if you want to just, I don't think I'm going to put these up here unless you want me to, but we can just call out, you know, there's loss of a significant person, and that would be partner, spouse, cousin. Absolutely.
The truth that you thought that the cousin or the spouse or a partner had gone ahead and given you, and that trust that you had for them.
So that really changed. Yeah, it's true.
Job?
Job, huge.
Belongings, even though that's money.
What's that?
I said belongings, even though that's money. Oh, you can replace it.
Oh, no, that's
Exactly.
true. Belongings are really, really out there, no question.
Health.
Health,
Yeah, that's
huge
another one.
health. And we're going to talk about that more with one of the handouts, but health is huge, and people don't think about that oftentimes. When you lose some of your health
Yep.
and ability to do things, what happens? You don't feel good, right?
You feel
No.
like you're stuck.
Mobility,
And you have to process that.
mobility.
Yeah.
Mobility, big one. Yeah, no, that's absolutely true. And let's see, even if you lost your car, I mean, that happened to me one time, and I thought, oh my God, I'm losing it. I can't find my car.
Oh, you were in the big parking lot, weren't you?
Yeah, but I lost it in terms of, you know, it wasn't there when I came back because somebody put it, you know, in a, what do they call that? The place they take cars that
Oh,
are,
someplace.
yeah. It was a long couple of days, that's all I can say. And I went through grieving during that time, and anger, and whatever.
But you accept that isn't the greatest.
That's true.
How about,
And you know, even loss of routine.
how about control?
I thought about that.
Loss of what?
Routine.
Okay.
Because I know when I retired, I had a routine when I worked, and so I didn't really know what to do. And I'm still struggling to make a routine. I keep trying to put other things into it, but I think that's a huge loss for a lot of people, especially when they stop working. And there could be other reasons too, but I just think that that's a big one we don't think of. Okay, so I think we've probably done enough with that. And I'd like to move us forward into the first exercise. So, let's see. Go to your packet, and when you see something that says restoring your life, but then look under worksheet 1, lifeline of losses. So what I'd like you to do, I think the exercises might be in the back. There it is. Would you hold that up so people can see what it looks like? There you go. Thank you. So, and I've used this exercise several times with working with a group, and it really does bring some things home to you. So that's why we're doing it. What I want you to do is, you see this line from birth to present? I want you to take time and think about the losses that have occurred in your lifetime, and sort of think about the year they occurred or how old you were, if you don't remember. You don't have to be exact here. I just want you to figure out kind of where on that lifeline of loss your loss occurred. Okay? So that's the first step. And as everyone's finished, I'll get you into the next one. Because I know it's hard to do two things at once. Really know it's hard. Okay, let's talk about grief and our reactions to that, because that is the normal reaction to loss, is to go through grief. And I always say, for me, it was always painful, messy, confusing, and sometimes debilitating. You know, I just couldn't move in the direction I wanted to. I felt stuck. So there's so many things you can say about grief, and I'm sure you could all contribute to that. But the other part is, grief is hard work, and that often gets neglected when people talk about it. But it's a struggle. It's hard. It's hard to cope, just as some of you found in this exercise, right? That it's hard to go forward. And that's the way it is. And you may feel, just know that it will move forward at some point, but you kind of have to take that time to deal with that grief when it's still a wounding feeling. The other thing I think is that people are frightened by grief. Does that make sense to you? And what were you thinking?
I was thinking, if you did so much grief that it depresses you and you want to enjoy
Yeah. And that's really, really hard. That's something. I'm sorry.
I said, if grief is frightening because it can send you into a spiral, like you're depressed and you want to enjoy life, and that's what you're scared of. You don't want to feel that way.
It's overwhelming.
Yes, and that's what we're afraid of many times, is the overwhelming feelings we feel. That's a piece of it. I think another part of it is the uncertainty and the lack of predictable feelings we'll have about the future. In other words, it just kind of wafts through any kind of certainty we may have had, and we'll talk about that more about meaning making later. And I think we just have to remember that not all events are in our control. And once you go through a big loss, isn't that something you take away from it? That we couldn't control what happened. And I think many people try to blame themselves. I know I did that. I know students I've worked with. I know clients I've had. It's such a tendency to do that. And I think, again, this is where self-compassion comes in, being able to be kind to yourself about it and not, you know, be upset that you couldn't control it, or maybe you should have done more. We always say that about, you know, I could have done more. And that's one of the things we often carry with us that helps us get stuck, you know?
Or you might think of it kind of like karma, where you've done something wrong. If I wouldn't have been like this,
Oh,
then
yeah.
they wouldn't have gone.
Absolutely. Yeah, if I hadn't been angry at my dad, he wouldn't have died. You know, that kind of
I
thing.
wasn't such a needy little brat when I was a kid.
Yeah?
And my grandmother was like,
Right, exactly.
I'm sorry, Jeanette.
And what do you think your granddad would say to you?
Well, he probably say, I don't have to pay taxes, so shut up.
Okay, got you on that one. Yes.
I keep saying to my sister, I keep saying to myself, when I told my sister to come live with me, she would still be there.
Yeah,
Because
that's a big
when she
one.
was going through with her youngest child, and the loss of her husband, and the loss of her home, and
It's a
not
lot.
being able to get her unemployment when the job folded, and her when she failed on the job, she sued them, she never got her money. And all that kind of put her into a depression stage. And before she even went into the hospital, I told her, I said, why don't you come live with me? And the only thing she could think about at the time was her growing daughter, which is contributed to her death.
Yeah, that's a big one. That
Very
really is.
disrespectful, you know, as old as she was, she could have had her own place. Then when my sister came home, she had to raise take care of her grandson, which wasn't her responsibility. It was her daughter's responsibility. So it was a lot of pressure put on her, and I didn't even know she was homeless when she passed away.
And so there's that
It's a lot.
feeling,
She was
big
dealing
feeling.
with.
Okay, I'll take one more and then.
It makes you consider your own mortality.
Oh, big one. Oh, huge. Thank you. That's often what people miss. It really makes you think about the fact that you're, going to die too. And it's right there with you because that's what happened.
Just a quick aside, most people who grieve over losses, it's another person, or in my case, it's living in some of the world's most spectacular places, which is not Philadelphia, but Philadelphia is good enough. What about people who grieve parts of their life? The 60-year-old woman who says, oh gosh, I wish I could go back to my 20s. Or the 80-year-old person who says, oh, walking with a cane now. I wish I could walk 10 miles like I did when I was 60.
So that's a loss.
We grieve parts of our own life.
We do. I mean, at all the different phases we read you that stuff. Yeah, exactly. Well, we can make some kind of peace with it or, realize what has come.
You don't have to. My Aunt Lil, who I told you about, I said, oh, Aunt Lil, you were in your 20s, you were a flapper. You were Johnson. You're darn right I was, and I love it. And you know what she said? 10 years of it was enough.
Oh, okay.
I was ready to move on.
All right. That was a good thing to say, wasn't it? I mean, it was helpful. Okay, I'm going to take this and then...
Yeah, one thing I don't thought about though is it's like, where would I be if I was a straight A student?
Oh, yeah.
From like kindergarten all the way to high school.
Right. The regrets.
You miss your potential.
Yeah. And so, potential. And they're all losses. I mean, I don't have time to go over all that stuff, but you're bringing up a lot of issues that are so critical in understanding this stuff. Yes?
Yeah. One of the things that I've experienced having lived over 7 decades of life is that as you advance into your seniority, the losses are going to pile up. The people that, just sitting here trying to write and recall the personal losses of individuals. And it doesn't get easier, but I will say that in reflecting on this, you have a template for conceivably dealing with it and getting through it, having experience. The first loss I could think of was as a small child, when one of my playmates was struck by a car coming down the street, and I had to watch him die.
Oh my goodness.
I guess I was maybe 5, 6, something, when this happened. And that's my earliest recollection of death and encounter with it. And then many, many more loss of all of my family, everybody, Yet I have developed a template to go forward. And I've learned more and more to live in the moment and to require yourself to find ways to be happy. It ain't easy, but it's necessary. That's what I found.
Right.
Are you dealing with survivor's guilt or something like that?
No, I'm not dealing with any guilt. I'm not going to feel guilty about it.
Because I know that a lot of veterans, they deal with survivor's guilt.
I know many people do. I don't.
Yeah.
Well,
I know you're not. It's not you personally.
Right. Yeah.
But survivor guilt is quite common. I mean, if someone of your age dies and you're still here, spouse dies and you're still, it's just very common to hold those feelings. Okay, are we on yet or not? Okay, so I don't have to turn anything. Okay, is that better?
Yeah.
Is my voice carrying now? Thank you. I should have asked for that to start with. All right. And the only other thing I want to say about grief before we move forward is that we live in a death-denying culture. Our culture does not give us a lot of ways to express our grief. I think it's better than it used to be, but it's got to be worked on. And I often refer to the workplace. They expect you to come back to work after you lose a partner or a spouse, or it's like, how can you do that? And many people.
You need grief leave too.
Exactly, grief leave. Some of us have really thought that would be an excellent thing. People.
I need to start a business so people can get.
Yeah, right.
Because it's hard.
It is hard. Okay, so we're going to take out the sheets that you have. Let's start with common issues for adults in loss. And the first one is, Yes, the same packet.
No, the first packet.
I'm
The
sorry.
other packet.
The other packet, yeah, one packet is the exercises, and you've already done one. The other, the first point on it is importance of maintaining self-esteem. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this because I really want to get to the meaning-making stuff that helps you feel. So let's just kind of go through this and see if we can clarify stuff that doesn't make sense. Basically, you know, it's just that we are, as we're older, we have more losses, just as you were saying. There are more things that accumulate in our system. And so we're also dealing with biological losses, physical losses, right? Hearing, sight, mobility. There's just so many of them. And they all sort of relate to loss. And I think we have to examine ways to, I mentioned self-esteem before, because self-esteem is sometimes shattered by losses. So we have to work at ways we can build it up. Sometimes a support group, oh God, sometimes a support group. I don't like mice. Can you tell? Okay, let me pull it over here. Okay. Sometimes support groups and therapists can help us sort of work with that. And I'm a big believer in groups. I know some people don't feel comfortable with it, but when you're in a group, a support group, you hear people saying things that you feel or think, and it's very reassuring. So if there's one available to you, I'd say go for it if you feel comfortable. And they don't make you talk, you know. They'll respect your, I couldn't talk the first couple of weeks I went to one. And I sat there and cried, but no one cared. Everyone was, just nice to me about it. They said, oh, you'll be okay. So then there's the coping with chronic illness, which some of you already brought up, or disability. And again, I don't know if I said this, but you really have to learn how to integrate the new you into who you are. Does that make sense to you?
Yes, like when I was 3, I was diagnosed with juvenile diabetes.
Oh, wow.
And my fondest memory was of eating Apple Jacks before they did the genetically modified stuff.
Oh, my God.
It was delicious.
Oh.
And now it's different.
Yeah.
It's either that or else my taste buds are going too, but my sight and my hearing, I'm like, oh, this is getting ridiculous.
I know.
This is really getting ridiculous.
And you see,
I'm getting a little frustrated.
it's also very hard for a child to integrate that when they're going through something like that and having to deal with diabetes at that age.
My mother was not having it, and it's like, oh, this sugar-free crap is horrible. I couldn't eat everything on one end, like,
Right.
give me the control. One day, just one day, maybe 2 days.
Yeah, that's really hard, not to be able to have those things that make us feel good, that soothe us because of an illness. So I think if we can just sort of take it one step at a time, and I think most hospitals now, if I'm right about this, have support groups for people who are diagnosed. Is that true?
Yeah.
Jeff probably has them, yeah. For almost any illness, they have some kind of support, which I'm sure you can find on the web or somewhere. For Jefferson and Penn, whatever you go to.
Well, whatever there are different foundations, there's different, like there's an arthritis foundation, there's
Right.
ALS foundation, there's.
And they're all running
And
them.
they all have support.
So they're not relying on hospital staff. They have somebody that comes in. Gotcha. And I can just tell you that's been so helpful to me and friends I have in being able to sort of integrate all this. Okay. And this anticipatory grief, does anyone know what that means?
It's when you know that somebody's sick, they're going to die, so you anticipate it.
And what happens oftentimes is someone will get better. And then we say, oh, this person's going to live. And then 2 weeks later, they do a nosedive. Very hard on us when that happens. It's very, very hard to deal with someone who's been sick and they're up and down and we don't know what to do with our feelings about it.
It's kind of,
Yeah, I lost my husband last year to ALS, and I was his caretaker for 3 years.
Right.
And getting to the point that I knew he was going to be an end. You don't want it to come, but when it comes, from being 24/7, and then all of a sudden, the train stops, and then it's you. So I'm still lost, I have no idea. I was so into the caretaker.
Well, sure. That was your life for a while. Yeah.
All of a sudden, there's nothing.
And it's kind of a shock that that's a loss, but it is. As much as the loss of a person, it can be the loss of taking care of that person because it took energy and time away, and then you don't know what to do when that person dies. You don't have a space.
Myself back together.
Right. Well, think about the previous losses and maybe the way you coped with those, and maybe that can give you a handle on.
A lot of losses for years.
Oh, I know. That's so sad.
It's like 35 years.
Oh, 35 years. Wow, yeah. I'm sorry. But I know you can, either with the help of someone.
Yeah.
Good. It's really important. You have to reach out and say, I need help. I'm vulnerable right now. I can't do it myself. Thanks. I hope.
Things getting better, and then they could go inside. I was thinking of, what is that, Pandora's box? What was the thing that did not escape? And I thought, oh, we did see up to her group, but then it got pulled back.
I know. Yeah, what do you do? It's very hard. I mean, you just have to figure it out, talking with people, what they did, or, you know, getting some help with it. It's tough. I think there are caregiver support groups, though, and almost any city and hospital is offering help to the caregiver because they know how hard it's been for you all that have done that. And you need to have a place to take your feelings.
On the back table about caregiver support.
What's that? I'm sorry?
There's
Oh,
information
good.
on the back table.
Oh,
about
thank
caregiver
you.
support.
Okay, I didn't know that. That's great. So your organization's provided you with support groups. Great.
The
Yes.
one thing that has helped me about caring for somebody who's about to die, take the big picture. We all are under a death sentence.
Yep.
50 years from now, everyone in this room is going to be dead.
I know.
It's not if.
No, it's when. Absolutely. Thank you. That's
and
really.
if you keep that in perspective, well, it makes you appreciate the moments you're not dead.
Right. No, yeah. No, that's a very important perspective.
Moments where it's like, you think about it, like I know I've been telling me too, so that you always always be thankful to basically wake up in the morning because you know someone did not wake up today. That's correct.
And that's absolutely true. Anything that you can find that sort of helps you deal with some of this is great. Yeah.
I know we have an issue here with opioid crisis in Philadelphia, and there are a lot of people, patients who are trauma-informed patients. I was wondering, and I'm clueless, and I need to be educated on the issues of trauma-informed patients, whether or not it affects some of them in the grieving process. And also, another question, piggyback on that, is the LGBT communities at large in the city of Philadelphia, do we know what the impact of those who are trauma-informed of the grieving process and the general population? I put them included also. And the question of how many of those persons are grieving as far as the numbers of populations in the city of Philadelphia.
Are you saying, is there a difference between the two in terms of numbers?
Is there a difference to, also you can add that, is there a difference, or what's here? That basically, yeah. Is there a difference between all the population? The
You know,
folks who are on drugs, who are
right.
here?
I really don't know the statistics on that. Don, do you?
I can just say one or two things. I think, first of all, I think in a lot of LGBT people, there's separation from families, so there's not a support system.
Right.
The second thing is there tends to be a little more isolation, and those are really big things. Working against people dealing with losses.
Absolutely.
And acceptance for the general population.
Well, and that's one of the things I want to talk about in a few minutes is disenfranchise loss, because it's so critical for the LGBTQ community as well as people who are getting older. And people don't always recognize that you are struggling because you've had so much loss. You must know how to deal with it. I've had that, I've heard people say that, and it's just really hard. Maybe you have some ideas, but it's still a big loss for you. So, yeah. That's right. Just because you know how to deal with it doesn't mean it gets any easier. Right. You do not know how. Absolutely. Okay, so let's flip it over to the multiple losses. That's the second sheet. Well, really, it's the third. Okay, so it's just a point that people forget about, and you've all mentioned it already, so I don't really need to belabor it, but just this idea that I'm having so much to confront. These losses are coming so quickly, And that is one of the things that leads to more complicated mourning and grief. People have to really cope with that because they can't separate out one loss from another. They're coming too quickly. And most people need to really have some help with that because it's just overwhelming. You always hope you get a break, right, between losses, but sometimes they can happen in the same month that you might lose a spouse and you might lose, you know, a sibling. And sibling loss is huge. The other point is that support networks can get very narrowed as we get older, and they know that social support is one of the most key things for us to have in our lives, to be able to cope and to move forward. So if we see those support groups narrowing, what can we do?
Maybe you can start your own.
What's that? Sit up.
Maybe even start your own. Sorry, pardon my group. Maybe even start your own so that way, instead of having those narrow, you have another option.
You have another option. We have to create some new options. We have to create some new relationships. And maybe it means joining another group that you might like and, you know, having that be an addition to your network.
One thing I've learned is you need to try to reach out and have relationships, friendships with people in generations beyond you and before you.
So wise.
I remember reading the biography of Oliver Wendell Holmes, who was the Chief Justice, who lived well into his 90s. And his Chief Justice role became like a prison because he had this notion that it would be condescending for him to embrace anyone who was not at his level of academic achievement and accomplishment. So that he lived out much of the last 20 years of his life in this isolated tower of loneliness based upon that ego.
Wow.
And that was a lesson to me that wherever you stand, you have commonalities with people at all generations, and you can be of value to younger people as much as they can be of value to you. So there's a reciprocity that can raise your self-esteem and make you feel better.
Absolutely. You know, and I think that's one of the key things, that we can be role models too for the younger generation. And I think there have to be more opportunities created in our culture for the generations to speak with one another. There's some groups working on that right now, and I think it's critical. The young people really need someone to help them see that there are good things about close relationships. It's not all about texting. It's not all about whatever. And they can share things with us. You're absolutely right. Plus, when you start to lose friends and lose family, having a younger cohort that are friends with you is something you can rely on. It's still there. So all these ideas are really terrific. Yeah.
I was going to feed off of what you were saying, like, regardless of your age, you can learn something from somebody. Like, I'm so computer illiterate, it doesn't make any sense.
Oh, right, computer illiterate.
What is that? American Online Ballot Service, I'm a genius with it. So if you ever look, then I'm good.
Yeah.
But my daughter will be the one, Mommy, you have to do this. Mommy, you have to do this. And I'm like, don't you taught me? And she looks at me. For you. But she tries to reteach me all the time. And I hope I don't frustrate the living things out of her.
Okay, flip to the second to last one. It says it's about the home, the immediate home environment. And I don't think I need to go over all these. You can look at them when you get home. But there's so many pieces to that, the loss of a home. And it's very complicated. You have limited mobility, so you need to live in a familiar space where some of those abilities are not taxed. Even though you know that in your head, it's still not easy to think about having to do that, having to move into a different setting that's going to be able to take care of some of the things you can't do. And right now there's a huge movement for people to age in place, to bring in resources that they need, as long as they don't have too many steps and things like that. So it's a planning thing in terms of, as you get older, you need to think about, do I need a one-floor space? Can I get that in my life? Just to make me, we've done that in the last few years, and I feel so much more relaxed knowing that if you have surgery, you can come home and you don't have to go up all the steps that you might have. So I know.
I'm just like, look.
Yeah.
Y'all are gonna make me at this one.
Right. So it's really, and then the other thing is that neighborhood provided you with a lifetime of continuity, the neighborhood that you might have lived in for a long time. And even though you're moving within the city, if it's a different neighborhood, it's changed. You have to get used to new things that you need to do in that neighborhood. And there's a loss. All of this to say that there are so many pieces to the home that require us getting involved with loss. And yeah, I think I said about older adults who've lived in a home for many years, it can be very traumatic to have to move at all. And some of the literature talks about letting older adults take a transitional object, something they feel comfortable with when they have to move into a smaller setting, to not have them strip their lives of everything that means something to them. Okay, and I mentioned the other one. And now just flip to the last one, which is a positive note here, okay? Then at the end of that packet. Okay, let's just go over it. It's not hard to understand, I don't think, but new research demonstrates that brain development occurs among older adults through new experiences and new relationships. Everyone's saying, well, if you could just learn to do something new, you rework some of those networks and you get them going, and it makes you cope much better with the aging process.
I heard that you do still have new brain cells growing. I don't know if it's true.
It is true. I think Don probably knows more than I do about it, but no? Okay.
No, except that there's new research that
Yeah.
can develop new pathways,
Yeah.
new brain cells.
And to me, that's very
We
encouraging.
weren't taught that traditionally, but it's really.
I'm sure you weren't, because I'm not sure they were looking at that years ago, right? Now there are more of us getting older. They have to find some way to help.
One example of that is a program in music where people who have loved music all their life and had always, as a kid, I wanted to play an instrument, suddenly that opportunity opens to seniors. And it just
That's terrific.
brings people to life. It opens up a whole new, the notion that you can learn and grasp and develop something new in your seniority. And it has a youthening effect. It has an energizing effect.
Absolutely, and you're getting those two hemispheres to kind of connect with each other when you're having to learn
If you
something
don't
new.
use it, you lose it. You want to
Exactly.
challenge it.
Yeah, no, it's true. That's a wonderful point.
They say
Thank you.
music said calms the savage beast or something, but it also goes ahead and helps the one that's already calm, cool, and collected.
How true. Okay, so the other one is resilience, the ability of older people to bounce back from disruptive events. I think there's been research on that, and it's very hopeful to think that maybe we have, because we've built up some skills over the years, we do have more resilience and ability to bounce back from a loss we're going through.
Can I just ask a question about that?
Oh.
Does that resilience come from just having so many experiences?
I think so,
that
yeah,
build
that's
to
what
it?
the literature seems to think, that it's, the experiences you've had that have helped you cope. If you can draw on those, then you may have a sense of resilience to cope with the next thing. You're able to do the work. And I just think it's good for older adults, as I am one, to hear some of these positive things about growing older. And sexual desire is alive and well. We know that with older adults. Amen is right. Okay. And I think this is building in quiet time. This is what this emerged. Building in some time for us to prevent ourselves from being busy all the time. I think one of the things that we all see is that, and I can see it myself, when we're going through something painful, we can set up a whole schedule for ourselves to not have any time to be alone. And I really think that's one thing that's a problem with grieving, that we don't understand that we have to be in that way. We can't be busy all the time. It doesn't give us a chance to be with our feelings and our thoughts. Okay, the other side of all this is distraction. And I think this has come up in the literature recently, but it's so obvious. We have to have a break from grieving. Do you know what I mean? Just, you have to find something that's going to pull you out and have you come out of yourself and deal with perhaps a new group. It could be, what are some thoughts you have? What helps you?
Making friends.
Making friends? Because that's that's putting a toe, as I say, into the new rebuilding of your life. You're still grieving, and I'm going to do this because I think it's what's happening. You're still grieving, but you can begin to put a toe in that new life, and that will begin to help you cope. It also can make you feel a little crazy. I've done this with clients, and they've gone, oh my gosh, I thought that meant there's something wrong with me, that I wanted to take a break, that I wanted to move out. And I think I'm just here to say, these are some of the things that I think really, if we understand a little bit about it, it can help us see what are those different ways we can work with grief. It's not all about staying in it, but it's also about moving out and learning how to do that. Learning, maybe right now I should listen to some music instead of whatever else you were doing. I need time to be with myself and, relax. What are the things you do to relax? Does anyone meditate?
I do.
Yeah, and it really helps, right?
My indulgence to actually escape is actually try something like totally off the wall, like a new experience, like going to the West Coast to do a camping endeavor that I've never done before, or go to a cathedral up in Toronto to do a pilgrimage. And back in the 70s, I would have been doing this in 2020. 2019. I'm like, you'd be crazy. I would never do this.
But that's really important. You were able to put yourself out there and do something really?
To clear my mind, yes.
Yes, to clear your mind and take a risk, right? Doing something very different. That's absolutely a good way. Yeah.
One of the watershed moments in my seniority was discovering mindfulness and the practice of mindfulness. If there's any one thing that has helped me to endure and get beyond so much of the pain that life has brought me, it is this discovering, and it's something that came to me. I didn't know anything about it. I heard about meditation and all these things, and I was say in my 60s when I discovered this, and it more than anything that I've experienced, it has opened up life for me.
And what do you feel is the most important thing about meditating? It's opened up your life.
Learning to live in the moment. And
Beautiful.
learning to perceive your life
Absolutely.
as having a measure of fullness.
And that's so beautifully said. Thank you. You're all just contributing some real kernels today. Okay, so whatever we feel relaxes us. Some people wanted to get at painting and all that, the arts.
Crocheting does good too.
What's that?
Crocheting. That's something I do.
Okay, whatever you found that makes you feel good. Or when you get lost in something, I always know if I'm lost in it, doing it, and I don't know what time it is, that means I'm probably enjoying it.
Right.
So it's something to really keep a tag on. Okay. And I think we have to learn that when we take a break, we don't need to feel guilty about it. Do you know what I mean? It's like after someone passes, or if it's, I don't know, I guess it would be also grief about other things, we really want to just feel like we have to stay with that stuff, some people. And so a break from experiencing the pain can actually really help. But you can wind up feeling like the first time you laugh, have you ever had that happen after a loss? You think, oh, I shouldn't be laughing. I'm supposed to be loyal to this person who's not here, and laughing doesn't honor their loss. But you know what? It's really important. It's important to laugh. It's important to even get into new relationships, which is probably the one that brings people the most discomfort. If they've lost a partner or a spouse, they think, oh, I really think I'd like to meet some new people, but I would be disloyal to the person who's not here if I did that.
That's what my granddad said. To please who? You're not supposed to laugh. To please who? My granddad would crack jokes to make it dirty about something that I can't hear them. But when I laugh, I'm like, I will probably fall laughing too. Maybe something I saw and heard when I heard. But like with the self-care thing, when Jeanette had taught this crochet class, I'm like, wow, how she started this off. But she's got me in the AC more looking at me.
Okay.
I'm like, good grief. But with that whole situation, you have to find a way to do self-care.
Oh, absolutely. Self-care is critical. It really is. I'm going to let you speak and then.
I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Don't let me be mouth almighty.
A question, what if a person does the opposite, okay? And instead of, when you say, finding something else, like you were saying, but running, to not remember the past until you wind up in the end, you like burn yourself out. I can't keep running. I got to face the reality of what happened.
Right.
I mean, there's like myself and other people I know, it's not that you face that reality, it's you're
Running.
running to stay.
Absolutely. And you can do that in work, in whatever is part of your life. We can run from the grief. But I think the key here is that you have to be able to balance this with the other. In other words, you have to look at your life and see, am I balancing the two? If it's been a relatively new loss particularly, am I allowing myself to get out enough? Am I allowing myself to stay home and just be with myself? Because it's hard. It's very hard. Because I think people want to get, thank you, David. Okay, we'll move forward. So let's just take that exercise and see what you want to do with it here. It's the one called Exploring Your Own Methods for Coping with Loss. And I want you to just kind of think for a few minutes yourself. Just write down, what are the times that we recall our difficulties? What are the times that we review the death and we speak with others about it? That's all part of this getting immersed in it, which is so important. You have to do that. But on the other hand, what are the things that provide our mind and body to relax? What are those periods, what I call a distraction, which is not a negative. A lot of times people think distraction means not good, but in this case we're talking about being positive. It's giving you a break. So maybe identify some of those. You don't have to spend a lot of time on it, but, and then the final one is, are you finding a balance between these two times? In other words, are you seeing that you're able to move? Not every, it's no time thing here. We're just talking about the capacity to sort of dip into one and then put a toe in the new world. It's kind of restoring ourselves by dipping in. So let's give it a try. And I guess we won't talk about that in a group. I don't think we have time, but why don't you all just begin to think about it for a minute. We don't have to spend gobs of time on it, but I just thought it would be a way of helping you see where you are. Or if you haven't had a loss recently, can you remember what you did? Because this is one of the key pieces of moving forward, is being able to do this.
Yeah, I just want to say, like, I had someone tell me once where it's like, you are your own best counselor and you are your own worst enemy too.
That's so true. And so our strengths are our weaknesses too, right? Okay, so let's take a few minutes and be with yourself and write some of these things down just for you, nobody else. Okay, all right. So let's talk about continuing bonds as another way of healing. And I think I mentioned this in the beginning, but the recognition that a loss of life or job or home is not necessarily the loss of that relationship. That relationship can go on a long time, and it's important that it goes on a long time because it provides us comfort, it provides us the ability to do some healing, and so some of the ways that people allow themselves to be connected with the person who's gone include photos. Yes. I mean, that's so big for most people, and the partners that I interviewed, they all had photos around, and for me it's been a good thing, so I know people use those a lot.
That's another question. Is there a point, because I know I'm flooded with photos. My house is flooded with photos. And is there a point that you have to put them away?
Well, that's an interesting question. Sorry. Is there a point you should put these photos away because they're not, you don't think they're helpful to have all around you? I mean, I can answer that for myself and then have somebody respond maybe. I had to put them away at one point. And, I felt so guilty that I didn't want to sit there and look at them, but I had to go forward for a while, and then I put them back in another year maybe. But I gave myself a break. Yes?
One of the things I do, and I'm only thinking it now as an exercise, I go out to dinner alone, and I acknowledge all of my dear friends who are not around anymore, who I know, who I used to dine with.
Oh, that's
and I'll raise a glass of wine and maybe even put a little down in the libation. And they're all there. With people say, "You're having dinner alone?" I said, "No, I've got," and I'll mention the names of friends, they're all here with me.
Wow.
And that is
I like
such
that.
a healthy exercise for me.
Well, I think maybe those of us, I haven't thought of that, so I think that's a great way to continue these bonds that we treasure. We don't have to let them go. We can practice ways to keep them around. One of the things some people do is to wear the clothing of the person who died for a while or forever. I mean, there's nothing wrong with it, you know? So you're wearing a piece of clothing that means something to you, and it's important as part of the healing to stay connected through whatever we can figure out.
Have you ever seen the movie 50 First Dates?
No, I haven't.
That basically comes into the subject where this guy had a brain injury and he does the same routine every day, day in and day out.
Wow. And that's sort of his stability. That's true.
A very good thing to remember, people, if you have the voicemail of them, say it's going to read it, or
Perfect.
on a computer.
Perfect. That you, yeah,
But to hear the voice.
it's critical.
My father died in 1985, and I still can hear his voice.
Yes. And isn't it wonderful?
As powerful, if not more than
I think you may be right, because I remember doing that too, and I don't think I've ever gotten rid of it. You know, it's just important to carry that with you and have it be supportive to you, comforting to you. There's not anything wrong with it. And you know, all these rules of grief that you hear about, oh, you shouldn't make any major decisions in the first year. Okay, I understand that. But sometimes making a decision to move from your home, if you can't take care of it or whatever, has to happen. And you are in charge of your grief. You are in charge of what to do during this time, because people like to tell you what they think would be good for you. I don't know if any of you have had that experience, but I had some friends who said, you know, you should be really doing something else right now. And I remembered our support group leaders who said, you need to spend this year, and maybe longer, doing what you think is right with your life. Don't listen to people who have advice and it doesn't work. You are the expert on this journey that you're taking. You are the expert. So I just wanted to emphasize that. I'm trying to think if there's anything else with that. Oh, I wanted to talk about reminiscence a little bit. Because remembering someone, and maybe remembering that person with another person that knew them. People do this naturally, and it's really smart. If you can spend time with someone who knows the person that died as well as you did, or maybe not as well, connecting over that can be so helpful. And I wanted to read you about Matt, who lived with his partner for 8 years, and then he died of AIDS. And I want to read his words because they're better than I can put in anything. All right. Okay, he talks about maintaining aspects, which he used, of the lives of him and others he was close to. There is still connectedness. Matt speaks of that spark of life, that at some point we were connected, needing to value that and to hold on to the good stuff, which is something someone mentioned early on today. So I think, you know, if I bring these people alive, you may be able to get some comfort from their words to us. Okay, and he said, let me think. So Jim was a survivor of partner loss as well as 12 other friends in the same year. So he was dealing with incredible, incredible loss. And he says, maybe he's the one I already said. He talks about that, and I think I even mentioned that already, I'm sorry. He remembers the memories which made him feel good and be able to tolerate some of the stuff that went on in his life. But I want to add something that we're going to move into later, but you know, he also said, I've had so much thrown at me in my life, and I was able to survive it, and I learned that I had to take each day and make the most of it. And so many of the people I interviewed had that comment. And it's not unusual. I've done other interviewing with other losses, and you know, this is something people have to do, and it's so important in your healing. Okay, so let's see where we're going to move from here. Okay, I had actually an exercise to do on that. Okay, the third exercise, number 3, this is a good one to sort of reflect on. This will help you reflect on the bonds that you have, as well as, yeah, that's what it'll do. It'll help you realize what so many things mean to you. If you could change one thing that happened regarding your loss, what would that be? Something under your control? Why or why not? And we talked earlier about control. Remember that we felt like sometimes we let this whole thing get over us, and we really need to realize we can. Okay, and then the next one you can read, and I'll come around and see if I can work with you a little bit. Making meaning from your loss, trying to understand it, is one of the things that people do before they're able to grow forward and move on in their lives. So, and making meaning, how did you make sense of your loss when it occurred, and is that different from now? What did and does that loss mean to me? The other piece of making meaning, which I always find very interesting, is finding benefit, finding something good about the loss. Recognize some of the positive changes that have taken place in your life after a loss, and kind of appreciate each day and what that means to you. What remains good or improved in my life? And discovering the life lessons that may guide you forward in life. And I mentioned to you about Matt, who had lost all these partners, as well as, well, he lost 2 partners, but he lost his last one the same year he lost 12 friends. And he said, if it doesn't kill you, it makes you stronger. What in the hell can anyone do to me? So out of the terrible losses he went through, I mean, that was like almost all the people he knew, he was able to say to himself, I need to make every day count. And that didn't happen right away. That takes a while down the road, maybe a year or 2. I didn't ask him how long, I should have. But it's a reaction I got from so many partners in this book, as well as others that I've written about. So I began to think this is really what people need to hear. I have an example of Louise in the book, she was a lesbian partner who lost her partner, and she says, I can be more true to myself now. It keeps me in the moment. I am a more empathic person to others who are suffering. So, you know, she was able to get in touch with some things that she didn't even know were part of her. So this is all sort of part of that identity thing that we have to work on. And I'll slip over to that. Because loss often changes our own identity. Do you know what I mean by that? Yeah. What does somebody think that means? That would be helpful. Put it into your words. Did you? Oh, I'm sorry.
Sometimes we define ourselves by an ongoing relationship that we're in. And when that ends, suddenly there's a hole in our life, and we have to find a way to fill it. And maybe some of us do, but those of us who do find a way to fill it are able to move forward. Mm-hmm. I have one friend who just could never move beyond that, and I'm not being judgmental.
Right.
But I always felt that, like every Christmas, he would unpack his grief and gifts and revisit it, and sink himself back into the depression about, oh, that was the best days of my life, and I had family, I had all of these things, now I have nothing. I would always suggest to him, maybe you should go and find some person, some child who's needy, and bring some of that same feeling to that person. He didn't seem to feel that would fill it. And like I say, without being judgmental, I witnessed him go through every holiday, go put himself into this place of grief and depression, revisiting it. Mm-hmm. And it just didn't seem, he certainly wasn't happy. Right. And it didn't seem to be a very healthy thing for him to do, but he couldn't break out of that mold.
But maybe he was remembering the good things, even though...
No, he wasn't.
No, he wasn't. He
That's
said
the
that.
whole point. His whole thing was to re-immerse himself into those dark moments and the pain. That's what he consciously did. No, he wasn't remembering anything good about it.
But
said something about
I was just going to say that it's not just relationships, it can be with the job.
Oh, absolutely,
Some people
yeah.
totally define themselves by what
That's
they do.
absolutely
And when they retire or lose a job, it becomes a
big deal. And it kind of hits you or them between the eyes. You didn't realize how much of yourself and your identity was connected to that job. Yes?
Everybody always talks about happiness, and I know everybody has their own definition of the word, but what do you feel when someone say happiness? Because somebody might feel like you're doing the wrong thing and you're defining it as happiness, but you might be offending somebody else who could be sensitive to what you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know, that happiness is like, to me, it's a thin line, and you have to define it, and sometimes it's not, yeah.
Right. Anyone want to comment?
Yes, that fine line between the quota of suffering and then that fine line of happiness, your quota of happiness. For some reason, I don't know why the human mind goes towards that quota of suffering, because you don't know when you're reaching that
Right.
breaking point to get into that fine line of that quota of happiness, bring that back into your life. That's
So-
a tough thing.
I know it is, I know. And you have to just be able to take a little bit of a risk, a small risk. It doesn't have to be huge, about how can I move into the world and not surround myself with all this all the time. Now, I don't think your friend necessarily did this all the time. He did it once a year, correct?
Well, he did it at Thanksgiving. He
And
did it at
Christmas. Right.
He did
But
it
how-
at his birthday.
But holidays are a time for us to get in touch with that. And, you know, throughout your life, you're gonna, if you've been close to someone, you lost a partner or a spouse, a child, those times of year were times you were really together. So it's almost good to find a way of starting a new tradition with yourself and others that might be pulling on the past, like maybe having it in the same place, but you're gonna add something new that you haven't done before. And I just, in my group that I was in, there were so many people that found interesting ways to do that. I'm trying to remember some that was a long, long time ago, but does that make any sense to you about how to approach it? Okay.
I'll touch on what the other man said regarding, it might not, because it seems insensitive to the one. I have a few friends that were in recovery, and they were talking about people, places, and things. If you realize that you're kind of hitting a sore, sensitive spot for that other person, try and distance yourself when you're doing something if you have to, or if you can, you know.
But happiness really lies within us. We all have different ways of approaching that. And having some of these rituals that we had at one time in our lives can restore a lot, but they can also move us forward in an interesting way. So I think, you know, things that you can think about for yourself, about how can you create a new memory about something that you did together with this person, as well as maybe adding other people to the dinner that you may have had at Christmas with that person. Yeah.
I think life is essentially very mysterious.
I agree with you. Yay, we should all applaud you.
We think we know ourselves. Well, we know things about ourselves.
Right.
We do not know the totality of ourselves.
We sure
And
don't.
in fact, I think the purpose of life is the longer you live, and if you do it correctly, you learn more and more and more about yourself. But you'll never know entirely who you are. I remember André Gide, the great French novelist, Nobel Prize winner, he said, "Know thyself," as Socrates says. Stupid, stupid, stupid thing. He said, "The caterpillar who would seek to know himself would never become a butterfly."
Oh, interesting. I love that.
Yeah, but,
Yeah?
yeah, we know ourselves.
Yeah,
And
but we don't
We know
really.
more and more and more about ourselves.
Right.
But we never know the totality of it. Hopefully, when we're on our deathbed, we'll know more than we did when we were 10 years old.
Well, people do say that, you know, when hospice workers come in to work with
But
someone.
it's really very mysterious.
It is. Life is totally mysterious. There are a few things that aren't, but overall.
But in that mysteriousness lies the adventure, lies the exciting thing about the opportunities that will be presented to you. Not always the pleasant ones, but how will I get through this? How will I survive this and maintain my self-esteem, my sanity, and a measure of joy? So that's part of what makes the mystery so evocative and so wonderful, I think. That is life.
Beautifully said.
Optimistic, that was a very optimistic point.
Yes, it is. And we have to have some optimism.
Should I be
right?
pessimistic?
Unless you're trying to teach somebody how not to be.
Right. We have to be careful of that one. No judgment here. So I'm just trying to think of some final things. Just trying to think back to the book, because there was a lesbian partner who wrote a book of poetry about her loss and about her partner. And she was able to make some career shifts after that. In other words, she wrote the book and it got out there, it was published. I don't have that with me, I have a copy. And it was very powerful for her. It didn't matter what it did for other people, it did so much for her to be able to move forward. So those kinds of things, the journal writing, and writing in general has been shown in the research to really be a healing process. Again, we talked a little bit about that with journal writing, but it doesn't have to be journal writing. Any way that you want to write for yourself, for others, helps to work through this process. You're seeing your words there. And as you write them, you're kind of restoring the loss, if you know what I mean. It's like you write them down and, oh wow, I didn't know I felt that way when I went through this. But it comes out so clearly when you're writing. So I encourage some of you to think about that. The other things that people have done to make meaning, I had a male widower who lost his wife and had daughters to raise on his own. He created a huge fund for the Girl Scouts, and he wound up volunteering there because his wife had been connected with the Girl Scouts. So he took part of that connection with her and built something more meaningful for others to share. And truly, that's one of the most beautiful things that comes out of these traumas that occur. You see all kinds of people doing things like that. I'm sure you can think of people who've been in the news and who've done that, you know? I'm trying to think of the school loss in Connecticut. Yeah, somebody, I'm trying to think, one of the people that was related to the woman who died, I guess it was her daughter, she started a whole career and fund out of dealing with this, which has helped so many people in our country. So you can probably think of lots of other ways. Alex's lemonade stand, you know, that was set up years ago by parents who had lost a child. And the research shows clearly that parents who've lost a child really start to do better if they can find some kind of meaning in it. It's not until the end. The other thing is self-forgiveness, which is important no matter whether you've lost a child or whomever. That self-forgiveness, that I couldn't control it. This was something that happened to me, and I have to cope with it. But trying to, you know, it's just important to do that with a loss. You have to be able to think about it and then move forward and maybe make some meaning from it, where you'll feel you'll be contributing. That's the important thing. You will be contributing to society. You will be making meaning out of this loss that helps you too, as well as others. So I think the people that have done that have realized what it's meant to them. And I'm sure some of you have done some of those things yourself or know people who have. I think we're out of time, right? So, yes.